Hey everyone, Charlie here. Welcome back to One Cup of Japan. This is a show where we have a conversation over something good that soothes you. I'm happy to say that we are back walking around for this episode. We are in western part of Japan. That's also technically how it tends to be classified, but what I wanted to say is we're in the western part of Sabai City this morning. Back walking around, as I said. This morning we have fire, one day. Black. It's pretty good coffee. It tastes like fire, hence I guess the fire. But it tastes like, I don't know, like campfire smoke is mixed into it, and I really enjoy that sort of flavor. Probably means this is more likely to give me cancer than most coffee, most burnt things. Interesting note about coffee. I learned this when Chokochi came to, not Chokochi, right? Chokochi? I forget how she spells her name exactly, but her name's Jess anyway. Australian YouTuber. I don't think she's doing YouTube anymore, but she's, from what I understand, she is part of like the esports scene, which is cool. Best of luck to her. Anyway, going off on one of my sort of tried and true tangents. Let's go down the street. What I learned when she came over, because she is vegetarian, was that in coffee, if you don't look closely, you may find yourself drinking like what is it, sheep's fat or something like that, that is added to the coffee to give it koku. And koku is koi, strong, or strength, but and koi in this case doesn't mean like strength as in like body strength, but like, for example, if you're drinking soup and it has a strong, bold flavor, that's koku, that's koi. Anyhow, so they add this to coffee to give it kind of like more body, and so you got to be careful of that if you are a vegetarian, or if you just don't like the idea of drinking animal fat when you're, well, just generally, or when you're trying to get your morning coffee in. This is interesting. I'm not sure what has happened here. I've often said many times that I just want to take a camera and go out and film places like this, because surprisingly, there's a surprising number of houses that are just sort of dilapidated and being reclaimed by nature. So it's a beautiful blue morning today. But anyway, our topic for today is not animal fat and coffee, although again, keep an eye out. Our topic today is about what makes the news here in Japan. This is one thing that irks me so much. There's this car creeping up slowly behind me, and you don't know if it wants to stop or what it wants to do, so let's let it go by. They're parking. Okay. This happens too when you're walking and like you're just walking down the street, or you're running, and people will slow to a crawl. Probably because they're trying to like be safe about it, I imagine, to play the devil's advocate. But the effect is making you feel as though someone is like, you know, in a movie where people slow down and watch you kind of thing as you walk. That's the effect. Here we are at another temple. This is not a temple, excuse me, this is a shrine. Beautiful. I've been through this part of Sabai. Is that a trail? But not for a couple of years. Looks like there's a little trail over here through this thicket of bamboo. It's always cool. But yeah, it's changed quite a lot. They've cleared a lot of like overgrowth. It's in this area. You can see the torii gate over there. Redundant, but anyhow. Oh, it looks like there's actually trails that go up that way too. But yeah, about the news in Japan. I was watching the news just before going out this morning. I was actually waiting for the grocery store to open so I could go and get some super cheap coffee. Well, this is a lovely find. And, you know, I was just watching the news for a couple minutes, and The news story this morning, you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember the name of the talent, the sort of like TV celebrity that was involved, because I don't really give a shit about those kind of things. But basically the story was that this guy, I think he went to like a restaurant or something like that, and he wasn't wearing a mask. And probably what happens is somebody like took his picture and, you know, turned him into TMZ, whatever the equivalent is of TMZ. I guess it's just basically normal Japanese news because they care so much about celebrity stuff. But and anyway, these commentators, these other kind of talents, these daytime and nighttime television celebrities, were just like, you know, giving their opinion about how disrespectful it is not to wear masks, and to think about the children and think about the families. Like literally that's what's being said, like think about the children, which for the record I don't disagree. I think it is incredibly disrespectful and oftentimes childish, at least in reasoning, when people don't wear masks. You know, but the thing is that it makes like such news, right? It was like this big story. They spent like 10 minutes talking about it on the morning news, and a lot of people are going to see that because it is the morning news. There's a lot of like particularly older people and housewives that are home in the morning. In Fukui, there are not very many housewives who are not working, who are not also let's rephrase this. Of course housewives are working, but what I mean is in addition to all the work that they do at home, you know, not working outside the home as well. But anyway, and to an extent you can understand, right? It's a celebrity and people, for better or worse, tend to look up to celebrities. We popped up next to some kind of little factory or business here. We'll read the sign when we go by and see if we can't figure out what. Right, so you can understand maybe why they want to make an example. Hello, mosquito. Why they want to make an example of another one. God damn. I am sweet. I can't read. The sign's too dark there. The kanji are like obscured by reflection. Something Kabushiki Gaisha. Incorporated company of some kind. Right, so you can imagine why they want to make an example of a celebrity, and, you know, if celebrities can't get away with this, neither can you, and all that kind of, you know, all that stuff. But one thing that also happens is that right, you'll see stories of like of like some place you've never heard of, right, in like some remote part of the country, right? Like Fukui, for those of you who don't know, is about, if you take the Shinkansen from Tokyo, it takes about 2.5 or 3 hours. Now consider that, how fast the Shinkansen is. So how far away we must be. It costs about $250 round trip to get to Tokyo by Shinkansen. We're below Ishikawa Prefecture, above Kyoto Prefecture, excuse me. And we are, in many people's minds, a remote part of the country, right? Like, I too never knew about Fukui existing until I was offered a job here, to be honest. And anyhow, as I splash coffee up into my nose, the crevasse that is shaped by my giant nose. But yeah, the thing is, here too, we hear about, like, for example, in Aomori Prefecture, you'll hear like about how somebody was robbed or somebody was murdered. And of course those things are serious. They're not good things. Like, there were victims, and, you know, I of course sympathize. But the thing is, like, why does it make news, national news? It's something I've thought about for a long time, is like, you know, why is it of national importance that some poor couple in you know, like I said, in Aomori or someplace like that, had their house broken into, and you know, it's not a matter of national importance. It's not something that everyone really needs to know. And it's the same thing, right? Will there be like, and murder happens too. Like, murder, I think you can understand to a a greater degree, particularly when it's egregious. And like we had a case here in Fukui last week or the week before, where a 16-year-old girl was like murdered by her 80-something-year-old grandfather, and that made national news. And I think you can understand why that makes national news, because of kind of the egregiousness of the case, right? There's this young girl who had her fire stamped out by an old man, apparently over alcohol, or at the very least due to alcohol. Well, let's be honest, the guy chose to drink, didn't he? So we are crossing a railroad. You see the Sabai sign over there on the mountain. This is Tobanaka Station. Never board the train here, but I like the station. It's remote. And so then naturally, as we sort of wanted to do, I sort of compared what sort of makes the news. Well, I guess before we move on to that, I should say that's kind of like par for the course. Like, you see these things on the news that get a lot of attention and a lot of airtime, that while they are sort of unfortunate, and to somebody certainly they are important, right? To some family who lost a lot of things to a robbery, or their house burning down, or lost a loved one to a violent crime or something like that. Certainly they're important in that sense. And I, again, understand that. But then you also see things that just they just have no, they just shouldn't get the time that they get, I think. Things that have no national significance. And of course, as you're wanting to do, like, I started comparing this to how news is made in the States and what makes the news in the States. And for the sake of this, because it's not really fair to compare these these news stations here to things like CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, just because the scope is different, I think. But if you think about like what makes the news, right? For example, like when I was living near Rochester, New York, like the Rochester News, or what makes even more local news than that, right? It's stuff that really truly is of local importance, or is truly, at least in my opinion, of national importance, right? Like, for example, right, if you see on the news that the President of the United States does not outwardly denounce white supremacist groups, then you should expect that to be a story that your news outlet covers, right? That's something you should expect for sure. But then I thought about it, and I suppose it's not as though the same thing doesn't happen, right? Like, it's not like we never get news that doesn't have any real bearing on life in the local area, or life on the country, that life in the country. And when I say the country, I mean the nation. Or like, I can remember, I guess I must have been in university, like time has ceased to have any meaning, I suppose, but now, I'll ask you guys before we start this, what do you know about Florida State? I know one of our patrons actually lives in Florida. Hello to you. I don't want to say your name and also say Florida at the same time, just because that might tie a little bit too much of your personal information together. But anyhow, what do you guys know about Florida? Hopefully what you know about it is that Disney World is there, right? But I think for many American people, Florida has a much different image. Of course Disney's there and Universal's there, and you know, you can go down there and there's nice beautiful beaches, Miami's there, all that kind of stuff. But nationally, Florida has an image of like being where all the crazy people are from. And I bring this up because it ties to this, because as I was saying, maybe I was in university when there was a story that came out. I don't remember exactly the substances involved, but basically, I think like some dude took like some meth and like attacked some people on like a highway, and then also ended up like literally tearing off his own face. Again, I don't remember exactly the details or the substances that were involved. Oh, God is beautiful this morning. Over there is an elementary school. That over there is a care center. So over there is just some houses. There's the railroad track that cuts through there, as you can see. We're gonna go back this way now because this is a dead end. And you know, and I think to a degree you can understand why those kind of things make the news, because it's just like it's just, I'm laughing about it because it's just so unbelievable, right? Like, dude gets high. It wasn't meth. It was like PCP. Are those the same things? I don't know. Forgive my lack of drug knowledge. But anyway, he took some shit that made him go like berserk, and then proceeded to tear his own face off, Red Skull style, I guess. And anyway, right, as I say, you can understand why things that are that egregious or that crazy or whatever, they make the news, because they're just so incredibly shocking, right? And by the way, there's sort of like a running joke that if ever you see like a news story that starts by talking about something that's really, really crazy in the States, where somebody has just done something that's just fucking batshit wild, it's in Florida. Apologies to you who live in Florida. I've only ever had positive experiences down there. I spent like a very large amount of my childhood in my early 20s in your state. I loved it there. I apologize, but you know, there's just some crazy shit that happens in Florida, apparently. And anyway, to tie this all back together, right? So as I was thinking about that, I was thinking, okay, well, is it really all that different that I, living in New York, get a story about some crazy asshole who ripped his face off after tripping on some bad shit, right? And I think the idea, the conclusion I'm forced to come to, excuse me a moment, there's a group of horticultural specialists working on some trees behind me here. And as I said, the conclusion that I came to is that there's still a difference, because, right, like I'm not gonna hear about, right, like how Georgina and Paul's bungalow in Florida was broken into, and they had like $500 or $1,000 worth of belongings stolen, right? I'm just not gonna hear that in New York. And I suppose that it speaks to two things, I think. And this is without any sort of research, mind you. This is just thoughts coming out of my head space. Okay. This speaks to two things, I think. The first being, of course, is the size of the country. Right, I think like the length of Japan is equal to basically the distance it takes to drive from my hometown to Disney World. Right, that was about, if I recall, about 1,200 miles to get from my hometown to Disney World. We used to drive there all the time because we had no money for planes. I say that, right? Like, we had no money, but fucking we were still going to Disney World, so shut the hell up. But anyway, so, you know, so the size is much smaller, right? Japan can fit into the States like how many times over kind of thing, right? So maybe, I suppose, in that sense, even a small crime has a bigger wake. But then, I guess it also speaks to kind of like how many crimes happen. Right now, people talk about how safe Japan can be, or how safe Japan is. Hello, ducks. And in a comparative sense, of course, it's true, right? Like, right, there are not people getting offed in the volumes that is happening, for example, in the States, and blah blah blah. Like, you know, but it's not really true that Japan is safe in some kind of ultimate sense, particularly for women, particularly for minorities. I'm a minority here, but you know, minorities that aren't how should I say this, right? Like, I'm a minority, and there are problems that come with not being a Japanese person, even as a white person. But there are so many other ways in which I benefit from my whiteness here. So what I'm trying to say is, for people who don't look like me, why do I have to make it so difficult? People who don't look like me, it's not so safe. That's what I'm trying to say. And anyhow, getting back to it. So you can imagine how then maybe even a petty crime, you know, shocks people more. But then I suppose really the thing I want to work my way back around to, right? Why does it matter that, you know, ultimately, why does it matter that one dude didn't wear a mask? Like, why do we need to make a story, a national news story about one guy, even if he is a celebrity, a minor celebrity? Why do we need to make that into a news story? And I think it all comes back to this sort of like the collectivist way of thinking, where if you do one thing, you do it to all of us kind of thing, or maybe I'm sorry, that's not quite what I mean. What I mean to say is, I think what happens to one of us kind of affects all of us, right? If you can understand what the difference and nuance that I intended there, right? Like, you know, I think in some respects it's the same reason why, like, every single time like something happens overseas, like there's some kind of disaster, like on national news they'll be like, oh, one Japanese person died in this natural disaster kind of thing, right? Or even if it's not a natural disaster, if it's some kind of an attack, because that's the world we live in now, where they'll be like, okay, well, one Japanese person was killed in this, and it makes news for quite a while. And you know, there's a sense that and I say this not knowing, because I'm not on the inside of this, but my observation is that people feel somehow more connected to it than I think American people feel when, again, Paul and Georgina get their shit ganked in Florida. So but as we near the end of this, I think another thing that's worth mentioning is right, like, I suppose if we do want to talk about, like, again, maybe like the American media landscape, right, and start talking about places like Fox News and CNN and that kind of thing, their agenda is decided, well, in some respect by the people who work there, of course, but it's also very much decided by the people who are buying ads and sort of paying bills and all that kind of thing. And so everybody ends up working for an agenda and for a cause and that kind of thing. And that's why Fox News takes the approach to news that it does, because of the people who are giving them money. And it's the same thing for CNN. And, you know, but I think absolutely what happens more here, and maybe this is naive, but what happens more, I think, than in the States, is that you have government interference into the news. Oh, this is Punto. Huh. Okay, little cafe here, who knew? I haven't been trying to find it, but I knew some place like this existed, but I never knew where. And what I mean is that, for example, NHK, right, the national news organization, or the national broadcaster that sort of like darkens everybody's door one time or another, they are a government organization, and they have very much been, and rightly so, criticized in the past for basically being Abe's news organization. Abe being the former prime minister, because they would either just not talk about certain news, or they would talk about certain news in a certain way as to be more favorable to the government and that kind of thing. There were also people within the government at that time who made it clear that if you cooperated with the government, then you would get preferential treatment and getting like exclusives and information and that kind of thing. And if you did something that pissed the government off, then you would get cut off, kind of thing. And so my sense, oh good, we get to see a train. My sense is that plays a bigger part into it too, is that like, and this is not an original thought, but the idea is that, why don't we just shut up till the train passes? Here, look at some bikes, look at my face, because there's a car coming and I don't want to show their license plate. I guess over here maybe you can hear me, but what's been talked about before is how basically like a lot of stories, not even minor stories, but also major stories, are kind of withheld. Like, for example, a story where like for example, celebrity was doing coke or had weed or something like that. And it always seems to be right when like the governments and shit that those stories get released. So then the coverage of the government scandal, if there's any of it at all, gets buried beneath like this focus on like, oh god, what was his name? This guy like named Pierre? I don't remember exactly, but the original voice of Olaf in the Japanese version of Frozen. And I don't remember exactly what the scandal was, but something was happening with the government. Maybe it's the Moritomo Gakuen scandal, where Abe had been secretly trying to like set up like this, or had been doling out favors to this like nationalist like nursery school kind of thing. And around that same time they released this news about, what's his name, like Piero Taki or something like that. Shit if I know, it doesn't really matter. And so suddenly all the news was focused on for a little while was on this guy who privately was doing drugs, instead of on the prime minister who was, trying to set up a place to brainwash children into being nationalist little trolls. But so that's it, I guess that's all I wanted to say. There was one more thing I thought was relevant to this conversation, but I forgot, so sorry, putting you at a tilt so it's not to show this lady. All right, we're gonna go back through that little pathway that we took to get here, and then that's where we'll end it, I guess. Is that what I want to say? Is that everything I wanted to say? Oh, so yeah, so there's like much more like government censorship. That's what I wanted to say. And it's not just paranoia either, right? It's not just like, well, the government, man, controls the media, right? Like, you hear that in every country, I'm sure. Ooh, echo. And I'm sure to varying extents it's true. But particularly here, where Japan has seen like their like freedom of the press ranking like globally just like drop like a stone over the last couple of years, as under the Abe government, who included the new Prime Minister Suga, and a guy who apparently was also instrumental in a lot of these crackdowns on the media and setting up this sort of like system of favoritism and basically cronyism and lackeyism, that kind of thing, right? And so you've just seen like Japan's like freedom index ranking for like journalists and like freedom of speech and freedom of the press and all that kind of thing just sort of drop. So it's not just paranoia. One wonders if he took a wrong turn. No, we're good. We're good. So yeah, so it's just something, it's interesting to think about, because sometimes, sometimes it's legitimately like important news, or legitimately like interesting news, like some kind of like human interest story. But it's like, also when you know about like all the other shit that's going on as far as like, like some sort of government abuse in particular, or it just seemed like, for example, the government was not covering the treatment of foreign residents when they were basically when they were being banned from re-entering the country and being treated differently from citizens in that respect, right? Like, I never saw that on the news, but you know, I saw how so and so married so and so, and how this dude was banging this girl in a place he shouldn't have been, and news about, you know, it's just stuff that doesn't really matter, right? Like, infidelity is a shitty thing, man, but why are you not focusing on like these human rights issues kind of thing? So, you know, all right, we are back at this path. Don't really have much else to say, guys, but if it was me, I'd want to see this path again because I like paths. Most boring thing to say ever. Imagine going on a date and your date partner was like, so what are your hobbies? And be like, oh, I like paths. But rather I like forests and thickets and stands and what are other words that get the idea across. The wilderness is a little bit different, but let's go with it. And brambles. I guess I don't like brambles. Oh, it's a very strange morning. Usually mosquitoes do not take to me very well. Probably because my body is, you know, like 27% fat and 73% garlic. This is not so delicious, I suppose. Although, you know, ahijo. So, okay, on that note, we're nearing the exit here, the trailhead of this tiny trail. And we're at the end of our cuppa. So I thank you all for watching. Ooh, this is a long one today. Half an hour plus, it's been a while. So I thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know about kind of like, I guess, what makes the news in your country, right? Or if you live here in Japan, have you noticed the same things that I have about what makes the news and what seems to be made to be important, even if it's not so important on a grand scale? I love your faces. Thanks always for watching. Cheers.